August Langston cursed under his breath as his phone flew out of his hand, bounced once on the old wooden bridge, and spun almost in slow motion before plopping straight into the icy river below. "Unbelievable," he muttered, running a hand through his dark, wind-blown hair. He stood there, alone in the middle of nowhere, wearing a $1,000 coat and Italian leather shoes that now had a wet stain from the muddy grass. He had taken a detour from the city for a rare weekend off, trying to clear his mind, breathe actual air, and escape the chaos of meetings, numbers, and the pressure of holding together an investment firm worth over $100 million. But instead, he just lost his entire life contacts, data, everything into a river. A laugh rang out from under the bridge, light and teasing. "Well, you've got good aim at least." He leaned over the side. A woman stood in the shallows, water up to her knees, her jeans soaked, hair tied up in a messy bun. She held something in her hand. His phone. "What are you doing down there?" he asked, confused. "Fishing," she said easily, holding up her prize. "For your phone, apparently." "You're out of your mind," he said, stunned. "Probably," she grinned. "But your phone's still got a heartbeat. I think I can save it." "Wait, don't move. I'm coming down." He stumbled along the muddy bank, slipping twice, and finally reached the river's edge. She was already climbing up the slope barefoot, cradling the phone in her hands like it was a baby bird. She looked like she'd just stepped out of a painting, freckles across her nose, sun-kissed skin, a faded sweatshirt with a tear at the sleeve. She couldn't have looked more different than the women he was used to, polished, sharp, always calculating. This woman looked like she spent her days laughing at things that didn't matter and living like the world didn't scare her. "I'm August," he said, reaching for the phone. She held it back. "Nice to meet you, August. I'm Maeve, and you're not getting this back until I do what I can to revive it," he blinked. "What? It's wet. If we turn it on now, it'll fry. I have a setup at my place just up the road." "Rice, heat gun, the works. You actually know what you're doing. Let's just say I've dropped enough of my own phones in this river to become an expert." He studied her. She looked serious and amused, and completely not intimidated by him, which was new. "Fine," he said finally. "But if you steal my identity, I'll sue you." She grinned and turned around, walking barefoot up the path like she hadn't just pulled a $1,000 phone out of a freezing river. Her house was a small, cozy cabin a few minutes away, tucked between trees and covered in ivy. There was a hammock on the porch, an old canoe leaning against the side, and a golden retriever that barked once before wagging its tail and disappearing into the trees. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and coffee. She led him to the kitchen, pulled out a container of rice, and gently tucked his phone inside like it was a patient going into surgery. "I'll know in a day if it's salvageable," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "A day," he echoed. "You're welcome to wait." He looked around. "This is your place?" "Yep, you live here alone, except for Frankie." She nodded toward the dog, who had returned and was curling up by the fireplace. "And sometimes my sister crashes when she's between boyfriends." He couldn't help it, he laughed. "You're serious?" Maeve handed him a mug of coffee. "I'm always serious about coffee." He took a sip. "It was perfect." "I'll pay you," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "For the coffee, for the phone?" "For the help. I don't want your money." "Everyone wants money. I don't," she said simply, turning to pour herself a cup. "I want people to stop throwing tech into rivers. That's what I want." He watched her from across the kitchen. She was different. Most people he met either wanted something or pretended not to. But she was just here, real, unbothered by who he was or what he had. "You don't know who I am, do you?" She gave him a sideways glance. "You're August. You dropped your phone." "That's enough for me." He leaned against the counter, a strange feeling settling in his chest. Maybe it was the fresh air. Maybe it was the fact that, for once, someone wasn't treating him like a walking bank account. But instead of leaving, instead of calling his assistant or asking for a car, he said, "So, what do people do for fun in this town?" Maeve grinned. "You're about to find out." By the time the sun dipped low, August had helped her chop firewood, walked through a forest trail with Frankie, and eaten the best grilled cheese sandwich of his life on her back porch. He hadn't touched his watch once. He hadn't thought about work or meetings or money, just her Maeve. She talked like she'd never been burned, laughed like she didn't care what people thought, and moved like she belonged exactly where she was. He couldn't remember the last time he felt this, at ease. "So," she said, handing him a blanket as the night air turned cooler, "what's your deal, city man?" "I run a firm," he said carefully. "Investments, mostly," she nodded. "Sounds stressful?" "It is, and boring," he laughed. "Sometimes." "And lonely," he looked at her then. Really looked at her? "Yeah," he said quietly. A lot of the time, she didn't say anything, just leaned back against the porch railing and looked up at the stars. "You ever think about just running away?" he asked. "All the time," she said. "But then I remember I already ran here." He smiled, but there was something sharp in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time, hope. She turned to him suddenly. "You hungry again? I could eat. I make a mean pasta." "I'll believe it when I taste it." She grinned and walked inside. He followed, already forgetting what life was like before today, and when she laughed again, tossing him a dish towel to help dry plates, he knew he was already in trouble. August woke to the sound of birdsong and the faint scent of lemon and rosemary. For a second, he thought he was back in his penthouse with a diffuser set to automatic. Then he remembered the quilt, the worn couch, the creak of the wooden floor when he shifted his weight. This wasn't Manhattan. He sat up. A note rested on the coffee table, written in looping handwriting, "Borrowed your coat. Coffee's on the stove, don't touch the rice." Maeve, he looked down. Sure enough, he was wearing a flannel blanket that smelled faintly of pine. His coat was gone. Outside the window, sunlight slanted through the trees, casting golden streaks across the yard. The dog Frankie lay sprawled on the porch, tail twitching in a dream. August stood stretched and poured himself a mug of coffee. It was strong, not bitter, uncomplicated, like the woman who made it. He found her across the field, kneeling beside a wooden structure that looked halfway between a greenhouse and a chicken coop. She wore his coat, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back with a red bandana. Her jeans had a fresh rip at the knee, and her hands were stained with soil. "You're still here," she said without looking up. "I wasn't sure I'd be welcome." "You're not," she said, standing, "but Frankie likes you. That buys you another hour." "Generous," she laughed, brushing her hands on her thighs. "You ever use a trowel?" "I've held a gold-plated one." "At a charity auction." Maeve raised an eyebrow. "So that's a no." He took the tool she offered and crouched beside her. The soil was cool and damp, and he tried not to ruin his imported boots. She showed him how to loosen the roots of a young tomato plant and nestle it into fresh earth. "You do this for fun, for peace," she said, "and tomatoes." August glanced at her. "You always live like this, off the grid, barefoot in the dirt." "I'm not off the grid, I have Wi-Fi." "I meant it as a compliment." She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist. "City people always think this is some great rebellion. It's not. I used to work in publishing, lived in a walk-up that shook when the subway passed. Then one day I realized I hadn't seen the stars in 2 years." "Is that why you left?" "No," she said quietly. "That happened later." She didn't elaborate, and he didn't press. They worked in silence for a while. The breeze carried the scent of lavender and the faint trill of cicadas. It felt unreal, like someone had pressed pause on his life and dropped him into a dream he didn't realize he needed. Maeve stood and stretched. "I'm starving. You any good with eggs?" "I can order a 7-course meal in 3 languages, so that's a no." She turned and walked toward the cabin. He followed. Inside, she cracked eggs into a skillet with practiced ease while he sliced bread at an angle too precise for breakfast. They moved around each other like they'd done it a dozen times, no awkward bumps, no second guessing. "You're good at this," she said as he passed her a plate. "I'm good at most things. Confidence or arrogance, both." She smiled without looking up. "I have to ask," he said, settling onto a stool, "why'd you really fish my phone out of the river?" "Because you looked like you were about to jump in after it," she said, flipping an omelet. "And I didn't feel like calling the sheriff to fish out a drowning man in a wool coat," he laughed. "So it was pity. It was instinct." He studied her face, the way her lashes caught the morning light, the faint scar on her chin that suggested a story she hadn't told yet. "You don't let people in easily, do you?" Maeve slid a plate in front of him. "You're eating my eggs, wearing my blanket, and drinking my coffee. I'd say you're pretty far in for someone I met yesterday." He picked up his fork. "Touché." After breakfast, they sat on the porch. Maeve sipped tea this time, legs tucked beneath her. August leaned back in the creaky rocking chair, watching the wind stir the trees. He didn't want to leave. That was new. "You're thinking too loudly," she said. "I have a company to run." "Then go run it." "But I don't want to." "That's not my problem." He turned to her. "What if I stayed a little longer?" Maeve didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood and walked to the edge of the porch, looking out at the woods. "People like you don't stay," she said finally. "You visit, you take pictures, you write checks to causes you barely understand, then you leave." "I'm not people like me," he said. She turned around. "You are, August, you just don't know it yet." He stood too. "Let me prove you wrong." "Why?" "Because I haven't felt like myself in years. And yesterday, for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a machine. I felt like a person because of you." Maeve looked at him, then really looked, and something shifted in her eyes. "You get one more day," she said. "After that, I'm locking the door." He didn't smile, didn't joke, just nodded. "Fair." She stepped down into the grass and beckoned him. "Come on, millionaire. I've got a canoe that leaks and 2 paddles that don't match." "You have a canoe?" She was already halfway to the river. "Don't worry, if we sink, you can pay someone to fish us out." August followed, heart pounding, not from fear, not from adrenaline, from something far more dangerous. Something that looked a lot like falling. The canoe tilted gently as Maeve handed August the paddle with the chipped handle. He took it without a word, balancing as he stepped in. The river moved slower here, its surface like glass under the late morning sun. Trees arched overhead, their leaves whispering in a breeze that didn't quite reach the ground. "You sure this thing floats?" he asked, eyeing the seams along the faded blue hull. "It floats better than it looks," she replied, pushing off the bank with one foot. "Unlike some people." "I see we're doing insults before lunch today. I'm just managing expectations." They drifted for a while, paddling in sync. The quiet between them wasn't awkward, it was full, like the silence after a song ends and you're still hearing it. Maeve trailed her fingers in the water, watching the ripples stretch out toward the shore. He wanted to ask her things. About the scar on her forearm. The old charm bracelet she wore turned inside out. The way she always looked like she was waiting for something but never surprised when it didn't come. But instead, he said, "What made you build a life here?" She didn't answer right away. Her paddle dipped once, twice. "There was a man," she said finally. "He made promises that sounded like freedom. Turns out he was just running from his own mess. I followed him out here thinking I was chasing something brave. When he left, I realized I'd actually found it." August didn't respond, not immediately. The current carried them forward, the sound of water licking the sides of the canoe. "He ever come back?" he asked. "No," she said simply, "and I stopped hoping he would." He nodded, not out of agreement, but understanding. They passed a fallen tree, its roots tangled like a sculpture, and a heron lifted from the bank, wings slicing the air with quiet power. Maeve adjusted her grip on the paddle. "So, what's your story, city man? Not the boardroom version, the real one." He hesitated. "My father ran a construction company," he said. "Small time, honest work. I thought I'd take it over, make it bigger, but then he got sick and everything changed. I went corporate, chased numbers instead of blueprints. It was never the plan." "Do you regret it?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Mostly when I remember how proud he was of what he built. He never cared about money. He cared about quality, about doing things right." Maeve studied him. "Sounds like you still care what he thought." "I do," he said. "Even now?" The canoe brushed against a cluster of reeds and she pushed them gently away with her paddle. "You ever think about going back to that, building something real?" He looked at her. The wind pulled a strand of hair across her cheek and she didn't bother to fix it. "I think about it more than I should," he said. She didn't press further, and he was grateful for that. They floated in silence again until she guided them toward a shallow bend in the river where the bank rose slightly into a mossy stretch of flat stone. Maeve stepped out first, pulling the canoe halfway onto the rocks. August followed, careful not to slip on the damp stone. She pulled a canvas satchel from under the seat and tossed it open. "You packed food?" he asked. "I don't paddle on an empty stomach." She unwrapped 2 sandwiches, handed him one, and sat cross-legged beneath a leaning tree. He joined her. They ate without saying much, just the occasional nod of approval at the taste. The bread was still warm. There were slices of pear tucked between sharp cheese and roasted vegetables. He hadn't had anything this unpretentious and satisfying in years. "I've been thinking," he said, chewing slowly, "about what happens when I leave." Maeve's eyes didn't move to him. "There's a road just past the field. You can walk it or wait for someone to come through." "That's not what I meant." She paused, then looked at him. "What did you mean?" "I meant I don't want this to be something I remember and file away. I don't want it to be a story I tell at parties when people ask if I've ever done something reckless." "This isn't reckless," she said. "This is real." "That's what scares me," August admitted. Maeve leaned back onto her hands, looking up at the sky. "It scares me too." They didn't speak for a long time after that. The river kept moving and birds called in the distance. When they finally stood to leave, the silence between them was heavier but not uncomfortable. It was full of the kind of weight that meant something had shifted, and neither of them knew exactly how to name it yet. That night, clouds rolled in. The air smelled of rain that hadn't started falling. Maeve lit a lantern in the kitchen and filled a kettle. August dried his hair with a towel after washing up and sat at the table, watching her move through the room like she was part of its structure. "Did you always live like this?" he asked. "No," she said, not turning around. "I used to think I needed more space, more noise. More people telling me I was doing great. And now I just want to sleep without wondering what I forgot to do," she said, setting the kettle down, "and wake up with enough time to notice how the light falls on the floor." He ran his fingers along the edge of the table. "I don't think I've ever had that." "Then maybe you should stay until you do." He looked up. "Are you offering?" "I'm not sure," Maeve said, "but I know you're not ready to leave." He stood, closing the space between them. "I don't think I want to." She watched him, her breath shallow, her eyes not flinching away. "If you stay," she said, "you have to stay as a person, not a millionaire, not a name on a building." "I don't even know who that is anymore," he said. "But I think I'm finding out." The rain started then, gentle at first, then louder. It drummed against the windows and roof like 1,000 tiny questions neither of them had answers to. But in that moment, as she stepped closer and he reached for her hand, there was only one answer that mattered. And it was standing inches away, barefoot in a kitchen that smelled like rosemary and rain. The rain didn't let up for hours. It came down in steady sheets, turning the dirt path outside Maeve's home into a winding ribbon of mud and puddles, and cloaking the trees in misty silence. Inside, they stayed close, barefoot on the creaky floorboards, their quiet interrupted only by the hiss of the kettle and the sound of water streaming down the windows. August leaned against the wall near the fire, watching the logs crackle, his shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. Maeve sat on the rug cross-legged, holding a mug loosely in her hands. Their earlier closeness lingered between them, unspoken but solid, like some invisible thread had tethered them without either of them realizing it. "I should have left yesterday," August said, voice low, almost like he didn't want to break the quiet. Maeve didn't look up. "But you didn't." "No," he said. "I didn't." She reached for a second blanket, tossing it across her lap. "You still trying to figure out why?" "I think I already know." She finally looked at him. He moved closer, kneeling beside her on the rug. "I came out here to disappear for a weekend. I didn't expect to find someone who makes me feel like everything I thought I wanted doesn't matter anymore." Maeve's grip tightened on the mug. "You don't know me, August." "I know enough," he said. "I know that you're the first person who's seen me without asking what I can offer. I know that you say what you mean even when it's uncomfortable. And I know that when I'm around you, I don't feel like I'm chasing anything, I just feel like I'm finally standing still." She hesitated, her throat working around words she hadn't said yet. "I don't do temporary," she said. "Not anymore. If you're just here to escape something, I can't be a stop on your way back." August reached out, brushing a curl away from her cheek. "Then give me a reason to stay." Maeve stood abruptly, setting her mug down. "You can't just rewrite your life in a few days. It doesn't work like that." "I'm not trying to rewrite it," he said, rising to his feet. I'm trying to finally write the part that matters. She walked to the window, arms crossed. And what happens when the rain stops? When the city calls again, I'll let it ring. Maeve turned to face him. You say that now. But what about when your investors want your attention, when your board demands answers, when being here starts to look like failure compared to skyscrapers and stock numbers? He stepped toward her, his tone steady. I've spent years proving something to people who never cared about me. I'm done doing that. I'm not choosing between a life and a legacy. I'm choosing what feels real. And this, he gestured between them, is the first thing that has. She didn't speak for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she said, "Do you even know what you'd do if you stayed?" He nodded. "I'd rebuild things, not just my company. I'd invest in something that matters. Real homes, real people. I have the resources, Maeve. I just never had a reason to use them for something that wasn't built on ego. You want to start over?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Not alone," he said. Maeve looked down at her feet. Her fingers were curled into her sleeves, shoulders tense. "I've only ever trusted myself," she said. "And that took years to learn. I'm not asking you to stop. I'm asking if there's room for me inside that trust, even just a little." She met his eyes. "You'd really leave all of it behind?" "I'd trade a dozen boardrooms for one more morning waking up in that quilt with you making coffee in mismatched socks." Maeve let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "I don't need you to promise forever," she said. "I'll promise tomorrow," he said. "And the day after that, and every one you'll let me have." A soft knock interrupted the moment. Maeve blinked. "That's weird. No one just shows up out here." She opened the door, revealing a teenage girl in a rain jacket and muddy boots. "Saw your chimney," the girl said. "Mom said to check on you. Power's out on the west side." Maeve nodded. "We're good here. Thanks, Ash." The girl glanced past her and spotted August. "You're the guy who fell in the river." Maeve stifled a laugh. "Sort of." Ash shrugged. "Cool. You guys want to come by for the potluck later?" "Mom's making blackberry cobbler." Maeve looked at August. "You up for it?" "I've never turned down cobbler in my life." Ash grinned and ran back through the rain. Maeve closed the door with a soft click. "Guess you're officially part of the neighborhood now. I'll try to live up to the title of River Guy." She stepped closer, her voice quiet again. "This doesn't feel like a mistake anymore. It never was." That evening, they arrived at the potluck covered in rain and laughter. August wore a borrowed flannel shirt and carried a tray of roasted vegetables he'd made under Maeve's strict supervision. The little community welcomed him without question. No one asked what he did. No one cared what he owned. They only asked if he liked card games and cobbler, and if he could help carry chairs. Maeve watched him from across the yard as he laughed with an elderly couple and passed a plate to a child with missing front teeth. Her heart tightened in a way that didn't scare her anymore. Later, as the stars began to slide between the clouds, August pulled her aside. "I bought the old barn," he said, his voice low. "The one at the edge of the trail near the ridge." She blinked. "Why?" "Because I'm turning it into something new, a workshop, maybe a school for building, for fixing. For people who want to learn trades no one teaches anymore." Her breath caught. "I want to build something with you," he said. "Not just a life, a future that means something." Maeve didn't answer. She just kissed him, right there under the string lights, while the neighbors clapped and laughed around them. By the time the rain returned soft, warm, and welcome, August had made his choice. And Maeve, for the first time in a long time, believed in beginnings again. The last of the autumn leaves clung to the trees like stubborn memories. A month had passed since August Langston bought the old barn on the ridge, and already the skeletal frame of the building had been reinforced with fresh beams, new glass, and a roof that didn't threaten to collapse under the weight of a breeze. The space had transformed into a warm, open workshop with long wooden tables, tool benches, and shelves stacked with supplies. It smelled of cedar and promise. Maeve stood near the wide windows, brushing sawdust off her jeans as the final coat of varnish dried on the table they'd built together. Outside, dusk painted the horizon with strokes of amber and plum, and the sound of laughter from a group of teenagers floated in from the edge of the property, where they'd just finished their first carpentry class. You've got sap on your cheek, August said, walking up behind her with a rag in hand. She turned, lifting a brow. And you've got paint in your hair. He leaned in and wiped her cheek anyway, eyes warm. We make a good mess. It's better than a sterile corner office, she said, grabbing the rag and tossing it on the table. I saw you teaching Oliver how to use the lathe earlier. You looked like you'd been doing it your whole life. I felt like I had, he said, voice quieter now. I haven't missed the city once. Maeve studied him. His face had changed over the past few weeks. The tension that used to live permanently around his jaw was gone. His eyes didn't scan rooms like they were looking for threats or exits. He laughed more. He slept in. He kissed her like every time was the first. You're different, she said. I'm finally myself, he replied. You did that. She picked up a small carving knife and twirled it between her fingers. You did it. I just handed you a shovel and pointed you toward the dirt. Outside, the lights flickered on along the porch of the barn, casting a soft glow over the clearing. The kids had gone home. The tools were put away. Frankie barked once from the cabin porch, then settled down again. August reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. I found this in one of the old drawers we salvaged, he said. It's a deed from 1935. This barn used to belong to a man who taught his neighbors how to build their own homes after the Depression. Maeve unfolded the yellowed paper, eyes scanning the faded ink. So it's always been a place for starting over, she said. He nodded. Thought that felt right. She looked up. You're not going to ask me to move to Manhattan, are you? I already told my lease manager to donate the lease to a small nonprofit in Tribeca, he said. I'm not going back, Maeve blinked. That's big. I want to build something real, and it starts here. With you, she stepped closer, slipping her fingers into his. You sure you're ready for dirt under your nails and mornings that start with roosters? He squeezed her hand. If it means waking up next to you and spending the day building something that matters, I'm ready for anything. She kissed him, slow and certain, right there in the middle of the workshop they'd built from the bones of a forgotten past. When they pulled apart, she whispered, I love you. August's eyes warmed, his voice steady. I love you more than I ever thought I could love anything. They left the barn hand in hand, walking the short trail back to Maeve's cabin. The leaves crunched underfoot, and stars began to scatter across the sky. The cabin glowed ahead of them, smoke curling from the chimney, dinner warming on the stove. Inside, they set the table together. No candles, no grand gestures, just two people who had chosen each other every day since the first. August ladled stew into bowls while Maeve poured cider into mismatched mugs. They ate cross-legged on the floor by the fire, music humming softly in the background, the kind that didn't need lyrics. Later, as the wind picked up and the windows rattled gently in their frames, August wrapped his arms around Maeve beneath the quilt on the couch, pulling her close. You ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't dropped my phone into that river? He asked. She traced lazy circles on the back of his hand. Then I wouldn't have rescued your sorry self, and you'd still be wearing overpriced shoes in a corner office. He laughed. Best mistake I ever made. She tilted her head back to look at him. You still miss any of it? He shook his head. I have everything I want right here. Her eyes softened as the fire crackled low. Then don't ever leave. I won't, he said. Not even for a second. The wind howled once outside, but inside the world was still. Months passed. The barn became a gathering place for more than just students. They held potlucks there, and in the spring, a wedding. August wore a navy shirt rolled to the elbows, nails still stained with varnish. Maeve wore a dress she'd sewn herself, simple cotton embroidered with tiny wildflowers. They didn't need a crowd, just the few who mattered. The rings were handmade, forged from melted copper and set with river stones. Frankie barked at the kiss, and the town cheered like they'd always known this was how it would end. Maeve's sister, surprisingly emotional, gave a toast no one expected, and August stood beside the woman he loved with a heart so full it scared him. Not because it might break, but because he never realized it could be this whole. Eventually, the workshop expanded. August taught woodworking 3 days a week, while Maeve started a seed exchange and small community garden. Kids who used to scroll through phones all afternoon now built birdhouses and fixed broken shelves for their neighbors. They never grew bored of each other. Never stopped finding new things to learn, new ways to laugh, new reasons to be grateful. And every now and then, August would find Maeve in the garden or on the porch, brushing soil from her hands, and he'd say, "Tell me again why you pulled that phone out of the river." And she'd answer, "Because I knew someone was coming who'd change everything." And he had, and she had. And together, they built a life that only made sense when shared. Forever.